everyone. Today we are going to talk about instrument called WebTau, and I have a guest, Mykola Golubev. Mykola, hello.
Hello. Hello,
He's originally Ukrainian, but now he lives in United States. He has tremendous trip from Ukraine via Singapore to New York, yes?
Yes.
And he's originally backend developer, but now he's main inspire and developer and I don't know, contributor and maintainer of open source tool called WebTau. I think that not many of you heard about this instrument, and that's why we decided to do such a video. And now, Mykola, it's your stage. Please tell us about your background, how you come to this idea, and what's this tool about, and all that stuff that you have.
Yeah, sounds good. So yeah, as you mentioned, I traveled a little bit before settling, and back in Ukraine, I worked a few jobs, and they were mostly, offshore, just doing some medical stuff related. But as I traveled outside, the jobs were mostly finance. And as you know, in finance, there is a lot of domain complexities. There's a lot of moving parts, and there are a lot of people who don't do any testing. And so at my first job, I started to do any sort of test and started to experience unique problems that I haven't experienced before. And as I was changing those jobs from one financial to another, I noticed the complexities, the problems, the patterns are pretty much the same. And so at one of the jobs at Goldman Sachs, I started to develop a testing tool to help with some data-intensive testing. And over time, ideas grew. I was building in-house tools. And then I quit. I changed my job, and then realized I need the same tools again. And I started building, like version 1, version 2, version 3, until some point we made a decision with the head of division to start open sourcing some of this stuff. I open sourced it slowly, like a private GitHub, so we can contribute from different departments and maybe work on it on the side. But then eventually I quit again, went to another job. It's also fintech, financial, same domain problems, same testing problems. And so over time, that private GitHub repo became public GitHub repo, was moved from a company-specific repo to my own repo. And I had my ex-colleagues from different jobs jumping in, helping, coming up with more use cases. And basically, if you go to GitHub now, you'll see the project is maybe like 4 or 5 years old. But in fact, it's probably like 7 years old. And if I take my original ideas, it's probably like more than 10 years old. And actually, it's quite fascinating that if I go through the history, I can see how the project evolves, how the ideas evolves, and how it most of the time is backward compatible because my ex-colleagues, my friends are still using some of the versions. So yeah, basically it's the essence of all the testing problems I encountered in my jobs, their solutions generalized and put into a tool. And so that's a tool we're gonna talk about today.
So your story is like you're kind of a guy that come to every company or every project with his own built shiny project. It's like
it wasn't the intention though. It wasn't the intention. But as I come, it's like, oh, so you don't have testing? What's your plan to do end-to-end testing? It's like, we don't have any plans. Like,
but it's interesting. Interesting story about this testing. You say that financial institutions or companies, as you said, Goldman Sachs, it's quite big company. So, and you say they don't have testing. So how they deliver securely?
I mean, they do have testing, but it's like one of those testings. Like, for example, some of them have a Selenium recorded end-to-end test, right? They will write them once. They'll put a big budget. They'll spend months. They'll record a lot of tests. It will probably be active for like 6 months. Then there will be a rewrite of UI or rewrite of some components. Half of the tests will be broken. People will say, we don't have time, we don't have budget, will be scrapped away. 2 years later, will be another attempt. And so the tools actually started at at Goldman Sachs, where I joined as a part of enterprise engineering team. The new team was created, and I'm like, oh, there's a new team, and I'm interested in testing, so let me join them. And we were building pretty cool original ideas and tooling, but it was all internal, all private. And the next job, that's when I like, oh, some of those ideas are pretty neat. Let me try to replicate some of the best ones. And that was the beginning of the WebTau.
So, and let's jump into this like instrument. So WebTau is a short name of web test automation. You are like decided not to reinvent yes like these shiny names. You took just simple first letters from like test automation. And I see that it supports a lot of like REST API, sockets, GraphQL, I don't know, browser, and we will talk about this every component. And I have to mention for those who is watching, it's only Java tool, yes. So you don't have any Python or like ports,
right?
Like, you know.
It's a good question. Sorry, it's a good question. It is written in Java, and I learned the hard way that I better build something in a core language like Java. But it does have a groovy DSL and runner. And I know there are not that many people specifically in love with Groovy, but I'll tell you why it's important. In one of the projects I was trying to improve the testing, we had Java backend, multiple, we have Python backends, we had Go backends, we had some shell scripts, we had like all kinds of things. And so the question is, what language do we use to write end-to-end tests? Should we write all end-to-end tests in Go, but we have Groovy and Python, or we have like Java and Python, would it be in Python? And basically we ended up doing the testing in Groovy, and basically WebTau runner, where it's a DSL, similar like DSL like Gradle, where you define your tests using the Java constructs, but you don't do classes, you don't need ID, you don't need the compilation process, right? The Groovy are scripts. So you define your test files in these small scripts with a nice syntax sugar, and you run them from command line. And as you run them from command line, you get all the outputs, you get all the reports. The Jenkins run them from command line, gets all the reports generated. And people liked it. People like, okay, yeah, like we don't need to stick to a specific language because we already have multi-language setup here. And it's not a language, like you don't need to write classes, you don't need to write for loops. It's a test in DSL. So basically it's like Postman, right? Some people go to Postman because like, yeah, I don't want to write my test in Java. To me, the WebTau component that can run scripts, testing scripts is like Postman. You can whip something quickly, just open your Vim or Emacs or whatever editor, write a few lines and run it. So honestly, I use it as a curl replacement. Like, because like with curl, I can send a request, trigger something on my backend while I'm developing it. But then the problem is this curl is gone. I use it only during development. With WebTau, I have a quick script to hit an endpoint. And then I hit this endpoint again. Then I copy those lines I used to hit an endpoint, stick them in the test itself. Right. So as I develop, I use WebTau to trigger something, whether it's database request, REST API, or browser. But as it's time to flesh out the test, I already have those lines. I don't need to switch from Postman or curl or something else to a different language and then start writing my tests. My tests are being written as I write the app because they help me to write my app.
So if I get you correct, so you are like doing some poking endpoints, have scripts like history, and then you just take these pieces and compound like a big test, like refactor, and have job finished. So it's like a very straightforward way, I would say, because it saves time. It's I do the same with browser tests like Selenium. Or now we will talk about Playwright. You said that recorder, so I usually use recorder. I record test and then quickly fix, update like page objects, and it's done. And you know, here in our community, in this piece of the world where I moreover known guy, once I said that there is no reason to write X passes by your hand because Chrome have this selector as blah blah blah, And if your Markdown is written in proper way, I mean, have some names or some IDs or some good selectors, Chrome does very good job. It takes like short expresses, and people was arguing that why no handcrafted, it's always better. But my point was that it's better, it's handcrafted, but it's also longer, like to click and copy faster, and it's reasonable because tomorrow your front end will change and your handcrafted express will break, and you will go click save or copy again and test, and it's faster, not like you save time. And I have this quote, the test is like a garbage. You have to quickly write, quickly fix, and quickly delete if needed, because sometimes tests become obsolete. We just change functionality and tests are not needed anymore.
Yeah, I somewhat agree. And I like that you do page objects and all. So that's a big difference, right? You record, but then you encapsulate, versus teams I saw, they just record and they, close the Jira ticket, say it's done and move on.
It's like, I think that it's test automation from 2009 or like, I don't know. I to be honest, I haven't seen such teams in nowadays. Like most people try to refactor and keep structure. The issue is only that their knowledge of Java, or I mean programming language, is quite poor, and that's why the refactoring is like, they try to refactor, but refactoring is still very bad. That's why the whole structure, when they have test 2, 5, 10 scripts, it's okay. But when it blows to 10,000 tests, it's like a mess. And that's why, people trying to do their best, but a lack of knowledge in programming and these patterns and all this stuff makes everything bad, because of like when you have big scale, you have to use all this. That's why I asked about Java, and that this tool is only Java related, because many people don't like this Java boilerplate. Like Python, it's more concise. You can do some shiny things like Groovy, but still some people have bad feelings about Java. But I don't know how is it in United States, but here is like market is, we have now a war and we have bad conditions on the market, but it was 50% was a Java, like job positions. Like if you take 100 open positions, 50 would be Java related, and all other like JavaScript, Python, everything else. So we have a lot of people with Java background, and
that's good.
That's why it's like this tool can be helpful. And I think that this such tools useful for entry level people, those who just need to get out of the box some tool like HTTP. You just write http.get and what you get, and then check, and that's done. And I understood this when I became a manager, because when you are an engineer, you mainly think that all people are super smart, they are Java developers, senior Java developers. But sometimes when you become manager, you get these people, subordinates with level, you have what you have. And when you say that, please write test, you see that they don't know Java, or their level is not enough. But you have to make this job done. And that's why you start bringing instruments that are doing this task, like solving the problem. Not just let's build new test automation using Java. You understand that in this case, you will see it and build. And that's, I am too old for this shit. And that's why you start looking that maybe Postman and Human is one of the best tools for REST API testing, but in your situation, because like nobody can write Java, nobody can do test automation. That's why you say, okay, let's record and leave it. So let's talk about this instrument. So as I understand, now you are one of the like main contributors, yes, and maintainers of this project. And all this REST API and HTTP like out of browser communication, is it based on core Java, or you use some underhood like rest assured or some libraries?
Core Java. Core Java. So, and I'll tell you why. So one thing you mentioned is juniors struggle with more or less complex testing setups. It's something I struggled myself as well when I had to cross some layers. So for example, I needed to test REST API, right? I found it too. Let it be REST assured, let it be HTTP template clients, doesn't matter. But then I need some database setup. And like, okay, so Google again, DB some other stuff, right? Now let me do maybe some browser interaction because I want to do something on the HTTP layer, open the browser, check some. Okay, there's another set of tools. Good. Now they all have their own setups, their own configs. They have their own assertions. They may or may not have reports. And if they do, those are disjoint reports. You know, some tool reports in this way, some tool reports in that way. It's like, I want, you know, the job I have, the tests I write are across multiple layers. It could be just one layer. You know, most of the time it probably is. But then let's say I have a command line tool that a quantitative researcher is using. So that's the entry point. They run a command line tool, but behind the scene, there's so many things, right? There is a backend, there is a database, there is a browser, there is like a REST API. And my test setup is quite, you know, quite heavy. Like I will run some servers, I'll insert records directly into the database or REST API. Then I run the command line tool. Now you run a command line tool, and that tool's happy path is good, so you test the output. But what happens if one of the servers is down? How do you do that? How do you write a test? And so the servers module appeared in WebTau. Now I can create fake servers, proxy servers, right in memory. I can say, here's a proxy server to the real server, command line tool. Here's the environment variable. Use that URL for your server connection. Now command line tool is ran, it's doing a job, and I mark that server as they're slow. I say, server, do not respond for like a minute. What's the output? What user is going to see? When you go to those setups, it's like, what tool are you going to use? Right? You can pick a tool for one of the layers and then write everything yourself. Or you try to pick other multiple tools, then run a test, and something goes wrong. How do you know what went wrong? Like there are no report. There is no concise story of everything that was going on. And that's how WebTau was developed. It started like a browser and REST API because there's a combination I had the most common. And then as I was switching jobs, I was like, yeah, here's a command line tool heavy company. How do I test that? You know, here's the WebSockets requirement. How do I test that? Here's a complex authorization requirement. How do we test that? And, you know, like one of the previous years is the whole persona concept that we probably talked before about on a different venue with you. But those things are driven by like a heavy use cases in the real world.
I wanted to talk about this because WebSockets and GraphQL, WebSockets, all the stuff, it's quite, I would say, not complex. Mainly audience understand, like we send request, get response, and WebTau have good and simple this, how to call it, language, this DSL.
Yeah, DSL. Yeah.
DSL. It's like rest assured, try it also the same way. And it's famous because it's just you program through dot, like you rest assured dot get dot blah blah blah, and people with low level people, it's easier just press dot and
that's a conversation I had recently. Yeah, it's pretty smart decision.
What you have. So you have the same approach, but it's interesting, and I would say it's. Do you know about such tool as Thucydides, like Serenity? Have you heard about it? So they had similar approach with this persona. It's something that I think we can talk, because not many tools provide such idea, let's say. Yes, because and how you came up to this. So this concept is like you behaving like a people, like Alice, and Alice do some actions, and then Bob or some other persona. It's like the ideas from BDD, or it's some other, like?
It was basically a necessity. The APIs we had to test, it was very important that if I do something as a trader researcher, and then you do something, we don't see each other results. When I search for something, so you did something, and then I search for something, I don't see your results, right? And so basically, like, how do I do that so the tests are not verbose? How do I do it so it's not noise and it's easy to express? And then it became not HTTP specific. I'll show some examples. It became agnostic to everything. If browsers knows about personas or can know. The command line tools, I can say, Alice, run a command line tool, and Alice will have her own environment with environment variables and stuff like that, right? Browser will have its own cookies and storage local and all of that.
These personas, it's like abstraction. So like instead of writing HTTP client 1.get and HTTP client 2.get, you introduce some like labeling, like Alice, Bob.
It's like a cross-cutting context. And even on the config level, we'll probably see it in a demo. On the config level, you can say Alice email, like in the config itself. You can say personas Alice home email equals 1, Bob personas Bob home email equals 2. And then in your code, you say cfg.email. And if you happen to be in the persona context, that will be the correct config value. So it's a cross-cutting across the entire WebTau. That's why, for me, it's very important is all the layers combined. You can use one at a time, you can use all of them, but there are concepts like personas, reporting, something else. They are across layers, but like they're built-in ideas into framework.
And like before, I know that you have some prepared presentation, but before you start, I want to ask, I see an example where we have REST API, and we have kind of a JUnit example. And you say that it's required to mark a class with a test like WebTau annotation. It's because dependency injection, or by?
No. Yeah, I need probably to clarify that more in the README. I'm pretty sure it's clarified in the docs. It's purely for report generation. If like you can use WebTau API in any context, you can do public static void main and start hacking. You can open Groovy script and start hacking, open Kotlin notebook and start hacking, or you can put a WebTau annotation on top of JUnit, and that on top of all those things, you will get HTML report. And that HTML report is almost like a mini app. It's a single file. I'm very proud of this solution, but it's a single HTML file. It has everything inside, even the screenshots for the failed browser test. And you can take this file and Slack it to someone, or make a, put it on S3. It doesn't matter. It doesn't need a server. Single file. You email it. You open it in the browser, and you see everything you need to see. You see failed test. You see the context. You see the outputs. You see colorful assertions. All of that baked in. So basically, that's one of the core problems I was dealing with. Is my test failed on Jenkins. And if it's a complex test, you spend like minutes and minutes and minutes trying to figure out what went wrong. And
I agree.
Now you just open the,
That's a smart decision, because like my last project was based on Playwright, this modern tool, and it also generates single self-contained HTML file, and it's very useful because you can send. You don't have to zip, unzip, all that. When people zip only a half of report and forget this data folder, then you unzip and see that there is no pictures. you say, oh, it's like, especially now, I don't know, maybe in enterprise, still Jenkins or some other CI tools still popular, but in modern like startups and small companies, they use GitHub Actions like as a CI, and like we are in GitHub. Why we need some extra additional GitHub? Have GitHub Actions? Let's use it. And this GitHub Actions quite, it's useful, but same way when after Jenkins you feel that you don't have plugins, you this reports kind of zip archive. And you have to think every time, you have to think how to correctly do this stuff. But when you have single, for example, with Playwright, we used Google Bucket. So after test execution, we upload to Google Bucket and then provide the link, and that's done. You don't think about how we manage, especially when you have these additional folders. You have to upload.
Sorry, Sam, I pressed some button. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, I can.
Oh, sorry. I missed the last second.
When you upload to the root, your HTML can be broken because your HTML has root data, blah blah blah, and you are pain. It's pain in the ass. And if you have such report, I can say that it's super cool solution. So let's go with your prepared, like what you have, maybe some demo. You said that you have some pretty new REPL. So
I was thinking I'll do a quick demo, the one I did recently at Java meetup here.
Okay.
It was meant to be a lightning talk, like 10 minutes, but we can have questions so we can like pace ourselves better and maybe like do 15. I'm looking for some reason I cannot find the button to mute all the notifications.
I have to multiple. Yes, I gave you like permissions.
Got it. Now I'm looking. Do you remember where I can mute all the notification on Mac? It seems like they keep moving it everywhere.
I am a Windows guy. So.
Okay, I put. Oh, perfect. I put on my phone and it went to the computer as well. Share screen. I'm gonna share screen. Can you see anything?
Yes, I see a black window, browser window.
But it has text, right?
Simplified unit and end-to-end testing with WebTau. That's what I see.
And by the way, just in case for viewers, we can, if you want, share that link later, because the way this presentation is done, it's a blog post that I can go into presentation mode and just go through important bits. So if someone wants then to follow up or get some more details, it's all inside.
Good.
So let's start with the simplified unit and end-to-end testing with WebTau. It was a lightning talk recently in New York Java user group, and so it's supposed to be short. So the few things I wanted to touch on is not everyone, a lot of people do unit testing. And sometimes people are lazy, sometimes they don't have tools. And when it comes time to create a business data for your test, people skim on a little. We'll talk a little bit later what I mean by this. But let's just pretend that we have some game store server and we want to implement some discount logic. People do some checkouts of games, and we want to have a logic that the more games people have, the cheaper the price, the more the discount is. So there's not that many rules, right? As long as you buy distinct types of games, like genres, for each distinct genre, you have a discount, but you cannot have more than 3 discounts applied. So basically some simplified business logic that one needs to implement. And to show you an example, if we bought 4 games, 2 of them RPG, like action and puzzle, there's going to be a discount applied to those. So first, doesn't matter if you do TDD or not, or how fanatic you are, you're going to need to implement the actual calculator for your discount. Right? That calculator at some point going to get the list of games, to be able to check their genres, to be able to check how many of them, how many are distinct. And our, at least first implementation is we want to go through all the games that are more than $15. And then we want to get their types. We want to get only distinct types. We want to count them, but limit by 3. And then times 10, that's our discount, right? If we found 2 games that are more than $15, they're different genres, we get 20% discount. So in order to write the test, we need enough data to hit multiple conditions, right? We need enough games to have at least few similar types. So we test our distinct. We need to have a few games that have high enough price, right, to test our limits. And we need to have enough games to make sure that it's more than 3, at least in one of our test cases, right? So we know that we're limiting by price, but number 3 and distinct types. So basically, we will need to create more than 1 game, right? We'll need to create 2, 3, probably like 5. And when you get to this, we're like, oh, create 1 game, set, create another game, set, game, third game, set. Creating the games like, oh, I'm tired. So when you're tired, when there's a boilerplate, what you do, you start copy pasting. You copy paste and update values. I do it myself once in a while. Then I regret again, like same regret as you just had a McDonald's burger. You want to do it, you do it, then you regret because you forget to update the values. Then your tests are failing. Then you don't know if it's a business logic or the test. And the second outcome of this, of the boilerplate, you're not creating enough instances. So you'll copy paste a few times, you'll update your values, but you're like, I'm done. 3 is good enough, right? But maybe you needed 5. Maybe it's the 6th one that would reveal your bug. It is an art in a way. You need to have an experience, but you definitely need to have some idea that it's definitely not just 1 game. And so one of the things that WebTau has is the core functionality. As I mentioned, WebTau has multiple modules. One of them is called WebTau Core. It has everything that other modules are built on, and it can be used for unit testing. Just this one module, if you don't want anything else, will help you with unit testing. And one way it helps with unit testing is with this table abstraction. You can use a table keyword and then pretty much have this var arg enumerated list of parameters. And if you lay out it in a proper way, like I did here on the slides, that will represent a table. And this table is a class of instance table data. You can think of it as a list of maps. In a very rough representation, it's a list of your maps. But then you can have methods like create games for your testing purposes. Create games that would receive a table of data. And this method is specific to your testing only. It's not in your business logic. It's in your SRC test Java. And that thing will know how to create them. We'll look at it shortly. But the important thing is you most likely going to have more than 1 test that requires a list of games, right? More than 1. I almost can guarantee it. And if there are multiple places where you need to have a list of games handily created, now you have create games from table. That's your abstraction that you can build using WebTau. Now, there is another thing. There are helper things that I don't show them all here, but for example, cell.gui will let you automatically generate a GUI, right? It's not a value yet. It's like a function. You can think of it as a function. So you put a cell.gui in any cell, and that cell will have a unique ID when the table gets executed. All right, so for our testing purposes, we create multiple games of same type. We create a different price, higher than 15, lower than 15. We add another type, genre sport, to make sure it's more than 3 of the sort. I might not recollect exactly what I put here, but there was a logic for these things. And then at the end, we say the discount percentage should equal 30. That's, we hit the 3 distinct types with more than $15. So let's take a look at the create games method. Java, we take table. Table is a high-level abstraction that have row stream. Row stream method that we can stream on all our rows, and for each row we can create a game. And I want to focus a little bit on the create game. This is one of the issues I had previously creating Java beans or, Java beans, for example, that have a constructor predefined and it either have no parameters or like all the parameters. But in some of the tests, you might just need, 4 out of 20 values, and you want the other 16 values to be default or random or something else. So this is the place where in create game record row, you can make a decision. If I got enough data in my table row, I will use it. But if I didn't have some data, I can default to something meaningful, right? So your test, your specific test, ideally should focus only on the data that is important to the test and randomize or default everything else. Does it make sense? Cool. So we have this one method, create games and create game, and it will be used multiple times in the slides later as well. So we created the games, we validated some simple output like a number. But what happens if we do the other way around? We call some business method and it returns us a list of complex objects, like a list of games. So this time we're gonna write a recommendation engine. And one of its goals is to give your games, like I wanna play a game and it will give you next game to play based on the games you already have. It's not gonna return a number, it's gonna return some complex construct. All right. But we're going to take a look at the test itself. Again, using the create library and some defaults behind the scene. We know that for this engine to work, the important part here is hours played. In previous tests, we didn't have an hours played column and it was still working because it had some defaults. So this time now, hours played is important for our unit, for our business logic. And that's why we specify here. And based on our plays and the games we have, the recommendation engine would say, you got to play sport games. Nobody plays sport games in your surround. So let's do that. And this time we're going to validate the game that was returned. And we're going to use a map. On one side, we have a bin, a Java bin that returns the business logic. On the other side, we have a map. And what's going to happen is WebTau going to compare property by property, but only the property you specified. And in this case, it will compare ID, type, title, and stats. And take a look at some of the fields validation. We can use other matchers from WebTau as part of the expected value. They say title contain 2023, right? Not equal, or price greater than 15. Or stats, it's another one that has a nested map, hours played one. Right? As you can build all these nested things, and only what you specify is going to be matched, and doesn't have to be exact values. It could be other measures, a combination of measures. So, for example, type any of sport, FPS, RPG. What's important, what was important to me to achieve in WebTau was that everything you write, everything you do, should have a output in the console. You can turn it off if you're not interested, but by default, any assertions, any validations with a pass to fail is going to print something on the screen. Like, you run something like, oh, did it assert anything? And then you go back and make the assertion to fail on purpose. It's like, okay, it did assert anything. So WebTau, every assertion you do by default prints. So let's take a look at what it prints when something fails. You're going to see that I was expecting next game to equal, and it prints a nice pretty print JSON representation of that map. And then I'm going to focus on specifics, say next game type was expected sport, but actual RPG, and give you the caret to the first mismatch. And if it's a multi-line string, there is another output, which is also quite informative. And what it does even more on top of that, it prints you the actual you had. So you had the game returned from your business logic. You say it should equal to this map. It wasn't equal, so now it is printed the actual representation of the object, and the things that failed, they are highlighted in this context. Right? So now like an instance, you're like, okay, sport RPG, what's sport RPG? Like RPG and sport, you can get immediately in your head, oh, it's probably type. But what if it's some number, right? What if it's some ID and you have 5 IDs? So now you get your actual object pretty printed for you. In the context of this object, you get all the highlights for the errors, and you have a detailed information about each error. And honestly, every time, like I use WebTau for my other pet projects as well. And every time I see this it's like, oh, thank you. You just, good job, Nick. You just saved myself like 5 minutes, 1 minute, well, even if it's like 20 seconds. So that's the output. Another like last functional test I want to write is another method, so I want to write another business logic method. That business method would need to return a top-end games that I have in my library. The logic is simple. It's probably based on hours played. I give it my library, like a Steam library or some other library, and it gives me top-end games that I played. And I want a business logic test. I want a unit test it. It doesn't require REST API or browser or anything like this. You can test it on a unit level. Let's take a look at the test again. Something you saw before, we're reusing the same create library methods. We put in table again as a data. We provide all the information that is required to do, to implement, to test the top end games method. There's one thing I want to show you. And again, I use it all the time now. It's a pretty recent addition. It's like probably like last quarter was released. The method is called trace. It comes from WebTau package. And you can trace anything you want. It will be most of the time as a regular output of like a print line statement, but it will go to a web report. But you also can trace the complex objects. In this case, we do trace all games properties table. Properties table means it will take the actual Java beans, library.getGames. In this case, returns a list of Java beans. So the method properties table will convert a list of Java beans into something that can be pretty printed on the screen. And then, so we do this as we develop our test. One of the recent examples I want to point is I was in a project, or the part of the project that, I've been a while, so I don't remember what's the kind of data structure in the site. So I started my test with trace properties table or whatever I just received, and I observed it on the screen before I proceed with my test. So we're going to do library find top end games. And in this case, in previous slides, we were validating one Java bean and the method. In this case, the top end games 2 will return us 2 Java beans. And so I could do 2 maps validation, or I could do a table validation. I could say, I'm expecting 2 rows, meaning I'm expecting 2 games. I don't care what the order is. Therefore, I mark ID as the star, like a key column. And you can mark multiple columns as key columns. And then we're still using the matcher inside the table, like less than 60. Right? So say for game with ID G3, the title is Persona 5, but the price USD is less than 60. Like for this specific tag, I don't care. Then the nested bean inside the bean, I say like map hours played. And now I say top 2 games should equal the expected table. And when it fails, first of all, let's take a look at the tracing all games. When you run trace all games, it's going to pretty print you the list of your Java beans. Like you did nothing. You might not even have toString implemented in your class, but you got Java beans from somewhere. You're junior or not, you're exploring the code. You've never been in that module. You want to see what the kind of structure is. You can spend your time in ID, that's perfectly fine. Or you can throw the trace, especially as you write your test, especially as you write your code. You might want to just keep observing what's the actual full data is before start writing your assertion. And so after tracing, we see that, the top 2 games do not equal that table we specified. And we probably can see immediately why. It's a price USD in our trace, we see it's null, but it's going to confirm us, the WebTau output is going to confirm us this thing. You say like actual is null, expected less than 60, expected 6, all of that. And on top of that, it will print the actual. Trace was printing all the games. Now these will print the actual during the comparison. And you can see the nulls are highlighted. It's like those are the problematic columns. All right. Yeah, so I did show you how to do it with WebTau, right? But let's get back to the good old boilerplate of Java. This is how you would do, unless you're more experienced and create some helper method for yourself. That's how typically I saw people do it. You get list of Java beans from somewhere, or like records, anything, doesn't really matter. And then you go property by property, one at a time, assert. So what's going to happen here? I even see it on the internet in the blog posts. People just say, you know what? I don't care what the games are inside. Let me validate the length. As long as the top 2 games length is 2, we're good. And nobody looks inside. That's the test I've seen, that the test I wrote before as well. Right, but that's not a good test. It returns you 2 games, but you want to make sure that the properties are filled in. So eventually it will go to your REST API, it will go to your browser, and then you'll need to write an end-to-end test to catch this. And let's just contrast and compare it to the table data approach. At least for me, I prefer the later, the bottom case, because I can focus on the data. I open the test, I see what was the input, what's the output, what's important here. I don't need to dissect all this noise and try to make sense out of it. Yeah, and same problem says with boilerplate for data creation. We can forget about certain fields validation, like we check, like we easily could ignore checking the price here, right? And we know the price is null from our previous example. Or we could copy paste incorrect values, and the worst thing would be if those incorrect values we copy pasted are actually incorrect business logic behavior, and our test passed. Anyway, it's probably somewhat objective, but it's my experience, and my colleagues ended up writing tests that way. Now that was a lightning talk, so I throw here a little bit on a REST API and database, like a startup end-to-end, and then if you want, we can expand on this using different slides. I just want to do a quick transition that the WebTau helped with unit testing, and it helps with end-to-end testing. So let's take a look at the REST API response. You will get from this game server. There will be a list of JavaScript objects like JSON. And we want to make sure that when we hit an endpoint, we're going to get back the values we're interested in. Just a heavy pass test, at least one. Like we need one to make sure the whole wiring is actually working. So we start with defining a database table in WebTau. There is a DB module. And you can say db.table game, and it will declare a game table. It's just a declaration. It's a lazy thing. Nothing's going to happen. And what you can do after that is clear the whole table. So our test starts fresh. We have a DB table, and we clear the data out of it. We then use table. Again, we use table data from WebTau to generate data we want to insert in our game table. And note here that we don't need to use snake case here. We can continue using camel case here. And WebTau would know, oh, is a table. There is table on the side. The table on the side is a database table. Let me convert the camel case into the snake case. And if you use snake case, it will do nothing. And if you don't have uppercase, lowercase, it will do nothing. Then we're going to query data from a table data just to show you that we insert it and we can load it and trace it just for demo's sake. And finally, we're going to now execute a HTTP GET method. The whole test is like this: clear the table, put something in the database, make a REST API call, make sure that certain things, and this is just for demo purposes, but to show you, like we can pinpoint a specific field in a request, like body is a list in this case, get 0, first element in the list, get type, a type of a nested object, like a type field of the nested object should equal RPG. Or we can do like a bulk validation. We say, here's a response. I'm only interested in 2 columns, an ID table for each of the response objects, because probably I tested other columns in other tests, but not necessarily. So you choose what fields you want. But I say, I'm only interested in an ID and title, and ID is order agnostic, and title are the games I want. And want to stress this one more time. Anything you do in WebTau, you don't do anything like print lines, debug endpoint, debug traces. Every command you do in WebTau, if it's from WebTau framework itself, comes with the output. We're creating a database, creating database data source primary. That's how much time it took. Running DB update, delete from game. That's how much time it took. Inserting 2 rows, running DB query, tracing. You do those things, your test looks clear, your output looks clear, you know exactly everything that happened before and after the error. And even in your responses, take a look at the response itself. You got a response from HTTP, you printed, nothing new about this. But what WebTau does is it highlights the values. that you actually validated. So type RPG, it's highlighted. You see that on output, right? The ID and all of these titles, all is highlighted. Why is it important? It doesn't just go to your console output. It goes to your web report. And it goes into something that I call a data coverage. Because WebTau knows you touched the field. WebTau knows what fields you didn't touch. And after all your tests are ran, it can tell you, you know what, for this specific endpoint route, there are these 2 fields that nobody looked at. None of the hundreds tests you have looked at those fields. It's not going to fail your build. You can make it fail your build, but it's important distinction for you. Like, oh, what are those 2 fields? Were they recently added? Are they important? Should we delete those fields, or should we validate those fields? Or are those fields where you go to a website and it says hello undefined, right? And I think it's pretty cool because it's like your line coverage, but more to the point. It's not because when you do end-to-end testing, line coverages don't matter. You run one end-to-end test and you have 70% line coverage. But what matters is there is a data that is dangerous. Is there data that nobody looked at? And WebTau knows where the data is. And I mentioned reporting. So let's take a look at the web report. This is the default view of a web report. You select a test and you see the important summary right in your face. It's like failed, expecting 2, and all the outputs you saw in the command line. It's here with the same colors and information. But you can also go to a the pass test. This test is passed, right? There's no failure. But you can go to HTTP calls tab for this specific test and see all the values we touched. Right? You can see there is we checked the type on the first field. We didn't check the type on the second field, probably not as important, but we didn't check price USD at all on this specific test. And maybe that's fine. Maybe some other test did. But if it didn't, you're going to get a report saying there are fields that nobody touched in your responses. Take a look at them. So that's the idea. And by the way, some companies actually need reports like this, depending on how much regulations they are under. But sometimes it's not enough to say, yes, I tested something, because they're going to ask you, show me the evidence. This is your evidence, right? This report is your evidence. It tells you, yes, I did touch those fields. I did validate those fields. I have all the information on the steps. Like if you open steps here, we'll have all the information of all the actions that were performed by WebTau. Yeah, so there is more. Again, there was lightning talk. So there is more, and there is a REPL mode that we might have, a chance to talk. There's a response coverage, open API performance. All of those things are there in WebTau, but you don't need to be alarmed, right? Some people get alarmed. I actually get some DMs saying like, "Oh, there's so many." Oh, it was a comment on Reddit. It was like, "There's so many of them. Like, I feel overwhelmed." And I agree with that. But the way WebTau was built is you can use either of them or none of them. You can just stick to unit testing, or you can just take HTTP module, or you can just stick to browser module. Whatever module you take, you're going to get all the benefits of reporting and console outputs. Or you can use them all. And there's even a convenient single Maven and single import. So you say, include this, import this, and you just start typing HTTP, browser, WebSocket. It's all going to be in your namespace. Yeah. All right. So that was the lightning talk that first time I have not rushed through.
Thank you for this great presentation. It's interesting about this performance. So you even do some like handwritten performance load generator, or like how does it do?
Right, it's a good question. So if you don't even do anything, just run your test, it starts collecting the metrics on HTTP calls. So yeah, it's probably HTTP performance specifically, but maybe it could be browser performance as well. But what we did at one of the companies is we ran web. So first of all, there is something you can say like repeat this. It's called repeat step. You can make HTTP call or something called like hundreds times. It will fail if one of them is fail. It will pass if all the pass. But in the report, it will accumulate the timing. It will be part of the report. Or more convenient for me, at least, is to take your test and run them in parallel. So it is not a replacement for Apache, what's it called? JMeter.
Yeah.
It is not a replacement for heavy loading. But you open your report and you have a HTTP performance tab. And if you see something that already taking a second, maybe you don't even need JMeter yet. But you already know a culprit. You already have a problem.
Okay, I understand. It's more like smoke testing, like if you wrote some test for get users and see that even without heavy load, like without like not this super huge AWS instance, it takes 1 second. Maybe it's like some issues exist even like on this level, so that when you deploy,
but there is nothing stopping you from nothing stopping even without like any changes to WebTau, run 10 WebTau instances on some Lambda server and get their reports, right? Or fail on any of them if there is a performance problem. Mm-hmm. Or what again we did on some other place is the performance metrics were collected, because you can add a custom report to WebTau, like a handler in Java, and it will collect the performance metrics for you. And what guys did, they put it on the Datadog. So anytime you run tests in parallel or anywhere, like any instance of WebTau ran anywhere on AWS or on the local, would speed to Datadog. In your Datadog, you can see, like a median is, let's say, 100 millisecond, 100 millisecond, 100 millisecond, then release. And then your Datadog instance is like 200 milliseconds, 200 milliseconds, 200 milliseconds. And okay, look at my Datadog. There is a regression. Let's figure out what that push of the release was.
Okay, now it's clear. So, and I would say that it's a very interesting idea with this table, like abstraction that you use, because really, when you use some tools like Rest Assured, or I mainly use Rest Assured for API testing in Java. And when you need to compare some big object, like not big, but 3 properties, you usually use this, as you said, as you showed in one of the slides, that like object get tuple equal assert, and it's like when you have list, you have to fill this list and then assert. When you have out of this list third element and price, you have to compare, not equal or like less, not strict. It's like very painful, but you solve this, I would say, in a very smart way. That's like very, I would say that it's maybe, I understand that it's DSL, and for Rest Assured we can do like spend a couple of hours and write the same method and do comparison the same way, but you have this built in, and for example, even for experienced people, it's just faster. You don't have to spend time doing like this bootstrapping. You just use it out of the box. The second question is like, I reminded that I solved this data preparation that you showed with the table. We have, I said my story before the main show, that we use bus rides, like you have to set up a bus and set up places, and we have different types of buses, like 2 rows, 52 places, 14 places, small, big, like different, and all this is like kind of purpose of testing, because like once we had bus with 52 places, but when person bought a ticket, the place number was 54, like out of the bus. And it was like a question, how is it possible a place out of the bus? But then we understood that this bus has second floor, and second floor has only 2 places, and that's why it's like, you understand, yes, it's out of the bus, because our application thought that bus is only one level. And the second question and I solve this using CSV. So I have the same, but you have Java DSL, this table, like table
Right.
object or method. But I used like CSV, and I use like load CSV. It creates everything, and CSV more natural, but it was just a faster way to implement because CSV already tabular data, and you don't have to.
So the good news for you is there are a lot of methods here to get table data from CSV very conveniently. And one of the things you might benefit from is it becomes a table data. And yes, you can write your own metrics for table data, but most likely you're not going to spend time on making those pretty outputs, right? It's like this pretty outputs is always like a last mile. Nobody cares. Nobody cares until they need to care. And
Yeah,
you can
I agree.
leverage both approaches. Like you literally say data.csv table, specify a file, and you get the table data from file. But I wanted to mention one thing, sorry, just quickly to finish. So is the table data, one of the reasons you might not choose a CSV and choose a Java, because CSV is a good choice, right? Like my friend, who I'm very grateful for using WebTau because he gives me a lot of feedback, he used CSV most of the time. And that's why I start getting methods like data CSV write, data JSON write, and read. But WebTau, the Java version itself, has a permute method. Permute method is pretty powerful when you have a lot of repetitive data. So in this example, you can see I say column A permute on true false, and column B permute on 1020, and column C permute on AB. And I'm going to get 6 rows as a result. Right, so like when I want the same row, but just a different column value, or like multiplication of different column values, you don't need to create 8 rows. You can create 1 row, 2 rows, whatever rows. And the other thing is cell above. This is something I've been using a lot in one place. It was created specifically for that. Is my data look like this? Right? What I mean by this is some values were just the same values over and over from the previous rows. And we go to the same copy-paste problems, right? You copy-pasted those 10 rows, then you updated 9 values, not 10. And this is the worst, where you don't know what's your business logic problem or your test problem. This is to minimize your test problem and focus on your business logic problem. And there is some math, of course, as well, especially for trading, like where you say T+1, you know, like T+1, you can actually define like here, it says increment. And I didn't put financial example here, but you can imagine trade date, and you can say increment, or literally call the variable called T+1, which is something that from the fintech business logic. And you would say a specific trade date, and it'll be like T+1, 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 T+1. Or probably increment is better in this case. I'll scratch those previous. Increment is more important. So it will keep, it's like in your Excel spreadsheet, you put 1 and then you drag, and it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. For whatever reason it might be. It could be a more complicated logic. But you can see it's a thing called table cell value generator. You can come up with your own, right? Cell.GUID we saw before, is one of those table data cell value generators. And you can see in Groovy it's even more, you know, just because you have operator overload, you can do stuff like that. But so CSV are good, CSV are great, but when you need to fake something or calculate something at runtime, do stuff like that, table data is easily to create at runtime using all this permute and T+1, but you can also have the map on it. Like you can create a table and then row stream on this, modify this table for another test, modify this table for another test. Or one of the things I did once was I had a table that defines the common default values, and then a table that you specify as a user in your test. And then whatever you didn't specify in your table, I take from the default values table. Basically, there are like a lot of examples, a lot of pros and cons, but you don't have to choose with WebTau. You don't lose your outputs, you don't lose your assertions if you read the table data from the file. The module called, just in case, the module called data, and there is JSON, CSV, PDF, and in CSV, like right here from the get-go, you can like data CSV.table, and you're gonna get your table data.
It's like, from Python, it's pandas library for
Yeah. Something like that.
handling tabular data like CSV and all that stuff. So the next question is like, as I understand and I see in the documentation, everything you need to include is just single Java like Maven or Gradle. This dependency.
This is if you go one, like give me all. Well, where was I? Sorry.
Yeah. The main question was, can I include only some submodule, or it will bring me everything like that? That was my question.
Let's take a look at why I'm here. And I just noticed a bug. For some reason, it says untitled. And yeah, interesting. Anyway, so documentation here, we're in the data module, and it says check imports and dependencies prerequisites, right? I click on this, and what I see here is single DSL import or data specific import. In a single DSL import, you do something like this, and then a single static import, and you get HTTP, browser, data, all of that in your scope. So HTTP dot, and you have the method. If you want a module, for example, in this case, data, you do WebTau data. You still do an import static data, so you have the same experience. Meaning you can put data dot in the same way as if you were to include all of it.
So yeah, that's good, because sometimes I would say in most cases I don't want everything in my have this. Once a day, I found that my C drive on Windows have only 2 gigabytes left. I was surprised, like why is it so? And I found that I use this tool special for disk analysis and all that stuff. And I found that my Gradle cache have 14 gigabytes of data. I was surprised that, like, wow, I use Java pretty big amount of time, but I don't use such big amount of libraries. And then I found that it was like some logs and all that stuff. But like when you include some, big library, it's like, especially it's a problem when you want to wrap something in a Docker and your container takes 600 megabytes or even 1 gigabyte, and you think, well, how to make it smaller. Start digging and see that you have libraries that are like a bunch of big bosses, and you cannot do anything with that. And the question that might be interesting before we go to the browser, like, because many people do browser test automation, is it does it support some plugins so people can write, for example, if I want some smart comparison, I don't know, my own, like, do you know this Hamcrest matchers?
It's a good question. I really glad you asked it, because I took a slightly different approach, and again, I took that approach 12. My God. All right. The initial idea for it was 12 or 11 years ago. And the idea sounded like this. Most of the axiom or the statement sounded like this, that I kept proving to myself, probably using the confirmation bias more than anything, is majority of the assertions we were doing in the companies I worked were, they look semantically like equality, right? We will compare things together. And at that time, JUnit assert library had a bunch of those assert equals arrays, assert equals list, assert equals. And I still want something, like when I look at the test, I want to see equality. I'm making sure this equals this. That's what I'm curious about. The fact that this is long and this is int, or this is local date time and this is local date time with time zone, or the other way around, it's not as important to me as do they match on the data I'm interested in. One example you already saw, there was a Java bin on the left. and there was a map on the right. They're not compatible types. We are not even validating all the Java beans. But semantically, the way I think about the test, I want to make sure the Java bean equals my specification or my expectation. So basically, WebTau lets you compare apples and oranges as long as either WebTau itself has the rule for it or you provide the rule for it. So most of the time, instead of creating a new matcher, you may or may not create a new rule for comparison. And we'll get back to some of the things. We'll only show you a Java bean or custom compared to handler. This is the thing. So there is an interface, and eventually you create a class. In this case, it's map and bean compared to handler. This is a class from the WebTau itself. It extends something because there is a common code used in multiple places, but it boils down to, does this handler compared to handler handle equality? Does it handle greater or less comparison, which by default it doesn't? It is a default Java method. And can you provide either a rule to compare or a conversion method, how to convert one to another, and then give it back to a chain of comparison in WebTau? So WebTau goes like this. Two things. There is a comparative handler. It might delegate further or might do the job. In this case, it convert one to map and delegate further. Now it's maps and map comparison, or something along those lines. So one of the examples could be something my friend recently was dealing with is, say you already have a custom complex data in your code, and it has some sort of resemblance to table data. Not 100% resemblance, completely different interfaces already, but it could be represented as table data. Right, so you have a complex objects and you want to compare them. In Humcrest Matcher or in some other libraries, you would go and create a matcher, how to compare your custom domains. You would do all the rules for when it's equal, when it's not equal, all the reporting that you will forget half of the time. Or you will stick just to equality method defined in the object itself, but that would be a mistake. Because then you have no information about what happened. Right? So, or if you have two strings implemented, like I show here in the console output, let's say you're lucky enough, your custom complex data has two string method implemented. It will still, you just dump two to string methods. And you either go figure it yourself, or IntelliJ may or may not highlight you some differences. But you have a choice, and you can say, you know what, I want to define my own compare rule in WebTau. And it will be pretty simple. As long as on one side is my domain object, and the other side is either my domain object or table data, I'll make sure both of them are table data and delegate back to WebTau now to compare tables instead. And since WebTau already has a tables comparison method, and it has all the nice outputs and tracking and all of that, you will get the benefits for almost no code. Right. So when it comes time to fail, now we're comparing your custom complex domain object. This is not WebTau anymore. This is not table data, right? This is your two things that came from database or client or something else. And then you use WebTau actual calculated equal expected, but behind the scene, because you provided your comparative handler that handles custom complex data, you get the benefits of seeing the data and the failures. So that's the idea. I yet to find a use case where I need to create a new matcher. WebTau has equal, contain all, any of, greater, less, greater than equal. It has like 7 matches, right? And in all these years of using WebTau for my pet projects and my fintech projects, I never had the need to create another matcher.
Happy you are, what I can say.
But you see how defining the rules, the compare handler rules, instead of defining yet another equality matcher, and by delegating to WebTau internal handlers already that it already has, it's like I don't define anywhere on the screen what message to show in case of failure, right? Because first, it's complex to define a good message. And second, I don't need to, because the underlying comparative handlers already have this logic of building nice messages and displaying nice data.
So like let's move to browser. I see
Let's do
that the first question, like I see that it's based on Selenium WebDriver. I think that it's because it started when Selenium was the only one option to drive the browser. Yes, and the question I see that you use $sign as a method, like to start, like how to say, to call browser interaction, similar to Selenide, if you know what was such a browser.
I mean, I would say similar to jQuery.
We have $sign for it was Groovy library. I forgot the name. Also based on Selenium.
Something like Gap.
Jab. Also dollar. So dollar was because of jQuery, or because you found that it's like other libraries?
I think it's because of jQuery. And to be honest, I saw Gap. I saw Gap. I didn't see Selenite at that time. And Gap was Groovy specific. And I learned the hard way that creating a framework Groovy first is not a good idea long-term, because there are a lot of people in the company who just want Java. So when I started WebTau, which is essentially in my head internally, it's like version 3 of the same ideas, I was like, it should be core Java with nice DSLs and benefits for Groovy, but everything supposed to be done in Java with as much of niceties as possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because Groovy has this strange dynamic that is like people sometimes hard to. There is no this, I don't know, interpolation of like this when you get hints from the IDE. I don't know now. Modern IDE may be smart enough, but I remember them when like 2010 or 12. It was quite poor. You are wrangling this, like it's always for me was hard with also JavaScript. That's why I started with TypeScript to remember all these methods, like what I have to do, and especially when you use some unknown library or new for you, and you don't know it, and you are like, I want to see what I have inside. That's why Groovy, but Java, that's like, how to say, Java has this advantage when you can learn by this like programming using $sign.
Yeah, most of the things, like if you write Groovy using Groovy DSL, you will get a lot of those dots. The only time you're not going to get dots completion is when it's a HTTP call, and inside of a HTTP call, like here, crude example, like say here, right? It would not know there is a last name, or it would not know there is a first name, because it comes from runtime. There is no, but if I switch to Java, obviously there is no methods. There is a get first name, right? So it's not different from Groovy. It's just a little bit more verbose.
Yeah, I understand, like Java.
But yeah, like if we go to
Java doesn't allow you to do such strange things. So
let's go. But yeah, so to answer the question, jQuery was my almost like first heavy lift in UI framework for web before Angular and React. So yes, all those dollars. But since I've been using now WebTau with the Kotlin notebooks, which I hopefully will have at least a minute to show, it doesn't understand dollar. So now, probably similar to how Selenite solved the problem, there is an alias to dollar. In my case, in the WebTau case, it's browser.element, because alternative is browser quote dollar quote, which looks not very nice.
No, okay. About browser, I think that it supports everything that Selenium have here, and all this Selenium grid, parallelization, all that stuff will work, and like
that will work. But WebTau does on top multiple things. One is the output, like everything you do similar to HTTP or unit testing, it spits up. We'll see the examples of this. And also it goes to web report, but also it provides the form abstractions. I think this is pretty cool. Like when you deal, for example, with checkbox, how do you make sure checkbox is clicked? What's your actions? You're like, is checkbox clicked right now? Oh, it's clicked, I do nothing. If checkbox is not clicked, let me click, right? You do those type of things. You have no reporting on what was going on unless you do your own print statements. In WebTau, you say there is an element, I want to set value on it. I set value true. If it's a checkbox, it will check it if it wasn't checked. If it's a radio button, it will select the correct radio button. If it's a drop down, it will select the correct drop down. But the idea is you don't care, because like people can build page objects, and page object encapsulate a lot of stuff, and that's what you need to do. But WebTau, in a way, already built some page object actions for you on form elements. Set value is that idea. If you change the underlying thing, if you switch your checkbox to radio button, right? If you switch box to radio button or radio button to drop down, I don't think you need to change your code. It will know that, oh, it's a radio button now, I'll do something different. I'm not clicking checkbox, I'm clicking some. So basically there are those abstractions. And there is also weight abstraction. Weight abstraction, I will just quickly switch to other presentation, but just one slide here, weight 2. Because some people bring the Selenium, which is a good framework. I use it once, but as I said, one of the reason I used it after I created mine, honestly. But one of the reason I wanted cohesiveness, like if I use a HTTP browser, I want the same matches, I want the same report, I want 2 different frameworks glued together. But people, like maybe from Selenium community, maybe they just don't like it. They say, why do I need to wait on something? I want it to be implicit. I want things to be implicit. And I argue that they're not implicit to your user. They're not implicit to servers. If servers wait for something, for some condition, that your task better wait on the same condition as well. And so let me show you what I mean. You can do wait 2 on things in WebTau that are not browser specific, but they work the same way, whether it's a browser or whether it's a file system, whether it's a database or a HTTP request. If you take a look at the bottom of this wait is not browser specific slide, you'll see here I'm waiting on a database query value. Right, there is some asynchronous process going on in between 2 servers. I want to wait for a record to appear that says there is an object with title slay this file. Or I wait on the file system file content to change. Or I can wait on the contain in the command line output. So basically wait command is a core construct of WebTau. And you can, at any point of time, you can switch wait 2 to shoot, and it will work as long as there is no more this asynchronicity for waiting. Now, so yeah, I'm not sure how much you got of it. Yeah.
So your main idea is that waiting should be explicit, yes? Like
it should be explicit, and it should be part of the framework. And as an example below, look, you can wait on browser elements, but it's not browser specific. Files, HTTP requests, WebSockets, command line outputs, anything you do. Like, and again, it's very different from like if you just use Selenium framework. Selenium has its own waiting on something, right? Then there is other framework, other people use awaitability, which is also good and great, but it doesn't integrate nicely with WebTau. It doesn't use the same concepts, doesn't use the same matchers. And so, yeah, so wait 2 can be called on, you can call wait 2 on the lambda. Like if you have lambda on the left, or just function, you say this function, wait 2 contain a wait 2 equal. So basically, if I go to matchers documentation, or there is an entitled, where the matchers, you will see here that there is shoot and wait, like shoot and wait.
Okay, so shoot doesn't wait for anything. It's just immediately comparing like object to object or element, page element to matcher or everything. But if you want to wait, you should explicitly say wait and
yeah, but the best part of it,
waiting stuff, how does it long wait like default?
So their configs default is 5 seconds and 100 milliseconds ticks. You can change this locally for each wait, or you can change it on the config global level. But the beauty of it is once your asynchronous system becomes more synchronous, you go and change wait to shoot and nothing else. You just flip the word. You don't change lambdas. You don't do any of that. And it works for like, for example, let me show you, there is a, where's WebSocket? Like, for example, in WebSocket, maybe for WebSocket it's slightly different, but you can say, hey, I have this session connected, right? And I want my received messages, I want to wait for them to be a certain value, like a certain JSON. And then you can see there will be like 25 attempts made. It will display only first and last, but in the web report, you'll see all of them. And there'll be 25 attempts made, and finally received is this. But if something changes, if now it's a guarantee that the next message is the one you want, you change the semantics. You say, instead of wait to, it says shoot. And you test passes as long as whatever expectations from your backend are correct. And I think this is very important, whether it's browser or not, to be very explicit. I'm not waiting here. It should be there. Or I'm waiting because I know there's a synchronous process going on. And frameworks that hide it, they make it simple. In my opinion, they make it simple for junior people, but then they hide a lot of things, right?
So
yeah, let's go.
Like very, very convenient and very, I would say that's even might be a better way, because it's you're controlling when you want wait, when you don't want wait. Because, for example, yes, in Selenide, you wait, like not wait, framework or library waits for you, but if you want, you have to, I don't know, to be honest, I don't remember. You can disable it by, I mean, locally, passing this timeout as a parameter to should. But yeah, if you want to globally say that I don't want to wait anymore, it's there is like, you have to put it global variable.
Cool. All right. So let's do browser. So browser has the same wait concept, but as you know, that's not browser specific. The way I want to show you browser is by doing the Groovy now, because I want to show one of the powers that even if you don't use Groovy, if you write the Java test, you can still benefit from it. So WebTau has this REPL mode, which stands for read the whole print loop. It's like your notebook in the terminal. It's people like to learn some languages or APIs this way, but I want to do testing this way. And the reason I want to do testing this way is because end-to-end tests are painful to write. In the big portion of it is the whole startup. You start the browser, you start everything, you start databases, then you do a few actions, something wrong, everything shut down. So you're like, I need to start over. And you spend like 20 seconds sometimes every time you restart. What I'm going to do is run WebTau in a REPL mode. I'm going to put REPL EXP. It's experimental. It's slightly different REPL mode from the original one. I'm slowly working on. So I'm going to run WebTau in a REPL mode. And what I'm going to see here is prompt. Let me just increase a little bit. And the first thing I'm going to do now in this REPL mode, everything is already, the whole WebTau is in the context, right? So I'll do browser open. Initializing WebDriver Chrome, do all of that. Now I'm in the context now, my GVM in the context where browser is opened. You know, I may have done some DB calls here, or file system calls, so HTTP calls, like I was talking to, remember, like HTTP get, maybe I'll did a few here. Oh, it actually did get something. Ooh, what did it get? Oh, it's talking to some of the server I'm running. So it did some
probably
HTTP.
Your WebTau, some stuff, or your local.
No, I have a game store running. So it says it's connecting to localhost 8080 because I have base URL. And the first thing it did is, so it HTTP get call. Sorry, like a quick side distraction. The first HTTP get call will check if there is a open API spec, because in my config that we don't see right now, there is a URL for open API spec. And so it says, you know, I'm making this call, but let me first read the open API spec because you specified it. And I'm going to be using this open API spec to validate the outputs of all the calls you do to catch an error. out of the box. And so the response we see here is actually a response from OpenAPI spec. It was a game store specification. But then it says, you know, I didn't find this separately, blah, blah, blah. So basically, didn't find the URL, but it was reading the OpenAPI spec and it showed me this. What I was trying to say is I opened the browser and now I can do all those HTTP GET calls, HTTP PUT calls in this context, right? And when I'm ready to go back to the browser, I can experiment with something. I do, without even opening Chrome DevTools to inspect elements, I know there are some links. And let's pretend my goal is to click on one of those links. And I say $8. Did you notice all these highlights on the right side? That was blinking. So it says, I found 18 elements. I tried to blink them on your screen. Here's the first 10 elements on the screen. You can take a look at them. It's like, oh, perfect. There is this business link, a business. And that's what I want. So a and business. This is not CSS. Now I say, I have those 18 elements, and I won't filter them now further by the text or regular expression or number or something else. So I'll say A got business. Now the link at the bottom, pay attention at the bottom, there's a business. So that's the one I want. Click. And now I'm here. So I am playing with my website, going one step at a time, right? Might as well start copy pasting those to my page object definition, regardless whether it's Java or Groovy. I can play with HTTP calls and all of those things. And this is usable for you, regardless of whether it's, again, it's a Java or Groovy, just so you can, you know, have a faster feedback loop. That's the idea of REPL. You experiment with your API. If though you use Groovy Runner, you can even combine things. You can, I'm not going to show you, the stuff is going to be a little bit longer, but you can run tests right from the REPL itself because Groovy scripts are Groovy scripts. I don't need IDE or Java to compile. So basically the way I do, I write most of my end-to-end tests as Groovy scripts. So I would write a test, you know, first 10 steps of it, run it inside the REPL by using a command. My browser and the server will be in a state after those 10 steps. And now I can continue. Now I can work on my step 11, step 12. Copy them to your test and then say, rerun me the test. And it will recompile the Groovy script in memory. And we'll rerun now 12 steps. And that's how incrementally I can build end-to-end tests like in minutes, right? Not hours. So that's the whole idea for the REPL. It was honestly created to deal with browser setup slowness. But now, as I mentioned to you at the beginning of our conversation, I use it for HTTP GETs, right? I develop my stuff and I do HTTP GET, let's say API.game, right? So that's my server, that's my REST endpoint. And I get my games, right? And then I press up, I get my games again. I go to my ID, I put a breakpoint, I press up, breakpoint hits, I get my game. Then maybe I'll do HTTP delete game G2. Then I get get. There is no G2, right? So I'm playing with my API using REPL. I could play with my API using REPL or use Postman. But the benefits of REPL or Kotlin notebooks is that I have those commands now. I copy them to my test and my test is ready to go. Does it make sense?
Yes, it's like, I would say it's very interesting, and it makes creation of tests a lot easier, like this thing. And as I understand, the next step is this Kotlin notebook. Like it makes it even like.
It makes it way better if you actually do Java. Like if you do Java, then this REPL not going to help you. That REPL not going to help you run a test and be in the context. But if you do use Java or Kotlin, then you can run your JUnit test, right? Maybe put your system in a certain state, and then open the Kotlin notebook and start experimenting. It's not as seamless as here, like for Groovy scripts, but I think it's pretty close. Like what is that?
And this Kotlin stuff, it's something modern, like new, yes, because I
Yeah, I think they're about to
It's
release it soon.
Actually, it was on a Twitter from you several days ago, and that's the first mention and like of this Kotlin notebook or something like that.
Yeah, I haven't seen it. I saw it from Twitter as well, and then I reached out to a person. I'm not sure if I can reveal his name or not. So we talked about Kotlin notebook, and then I got some help figuring out how to integrate with it. I did not realize at that time that it wasn't officially released. It's like not version 1. Apparently, it's going to become version 1 soon, but it was available on the IntelliJ plugins for a while. So how it looks like is if you go to new and say Kotlin notebook, you can say my end-to-end test. Usually notebooks, Python notebooks, Jupyter notebooks are used for data science. But since I've been using REPL for testing, it's like, it would be so much easier for me to do a REPL-like experience in IDE and not in the, like in IDE with all the code completion and not in the REPL that yet to get auto-completion. And so what I was impressed with Kotlin notebook is they have use latest descriptors on. This means that whatever library definition of WebTau I put in the Kotlin repository is going to get up to date right now and not as part of kernel core, is my understanding. But it's not important right now. So at the end of the day, you will be able to say use WebTau as your cell. And what it's going to do is load WebTau from a Maven Central, put it in the class path here, make this one single import statement. So, you know, the things like HTTP, why is not being auto-completed? Let me just run in case a cell. Maybe my setup is a little bit. So the idea of Kotlin notebook is, you know, you do some executions like in REPL and you get the result. And okay, so now I get my auto-completion. So browser open, right? Now like REPL, but way friendlier. You know what, let's do, sorry, I wanna run my UI on the local machine. So instead of testing Google, I'll show you quickly. Where am I? Game store front end. And here I have the mini React app just for demo purposes. Now we don't need this guy. We're gonna open the result, right? So now this is my website under development that I can, in the same IDE, right? In the same IDE, what's going on here? One second. In the same IDE, I can go and modify my website to fix some bugs. In the same IDE, I can switch to Kotlin notebook and trigger something, trigger some actions or sequence of actions. So in order not to repeat myself, it's like my live running test. So what I'm going to do here is, oh, that's the moment where Kotlin doesn't like browser or doesn't like the, that's some kind of error to report. Okay, so you saw my the thing that clicked. By the way, now I just can go to a cell and rerun it. So I see those two inputs I'm interested in. Here's some output from WebTau. I'm interested in below 60. So I say browser element below 60, right? Okay, that's the one we need. What I can do is assign it to a variable. I say filter below 60, right? And then filter below 60, set value true, and get my checkbox checked, right? And also get all this setting value, setting checkbox value to true, set checkbox to true, all this time and all is included. So now building my test, I can switch to my JUnit, Kotlin test, Kotest, or K-test, any of the frameworks you like. Copy those lines to page objects, copy those lines to something else. In theory, notebooks, and I haven't tested it yet, notebook can see the class path. Ooh, what just happened? Siri saw something. In theory, Kotlin notebook can see.
Okay. Let me know if there's anything else you need.
Hi, Siri. Can see the class path of your page objects. You copy from here to your class in a page object, you import class in the Kotlin notebook, and now you're in the context of your existing page objects and the new page objects you're trying to build. That's in theory. I haven't tried this flow yet, but that would be awesome, right? Like you have something you're building now, you have something already in your repo as existing page objects, you open a browser, in the same idea, you modify your TypeScript or JavaScript for React app, and you keep building up your page objects and re-importing them here, building more. And it's all like, I think that's like, next time I'm going to write end-to-end tests for UI specifically. And if I will be forced to do it in Java, not Groovy, or in Kotlin, well, forced in Java or asked in Kotlin, that's how I'm going to be doing. That's how I'm going to be doing it, is defining, assuming there is no class path issues and bugs with Kotlin notebook, because so far I wasn't importing anything but WebTau here, but I saw in documentation and in the settings of IntelliJ that it can see your project class path, meaning it can see your test or page objects. I think that would be pretty streamlined experience of writing a lot of UI tests. And again, it doesn't need to be WebTau. It's just, I like that WebTau prints me all of this. I like that WebTau highlights me stuff. But you can bring here pure Selenium, Selenite. You can print anything that is runnable on JVM and get the same experience. That's why I think the Kotlin notebooks are so cool, not just for data science, but for your incremental end-to-end testing.
Yeah, that's something like we missed before. Like it's exists in Python, but now maybe JetBrains will bring it for JVM. I like Java. I don't know. Java 11 already have this repo.
JShell?
JShell, yeah, but it's not as popular and it's not as handy as like you don't have this auto completion and everything. But here is like completely IDE and you can do everything inside. So I think that's enough for today. You showed us the most comprehensive things about WebTau, and I think that if people are interested, they come to page like this documentation. I will put it in the description, and like
GitHub repo should be good.
Yeah, should be like repository and site, and you can go and play. If not, like if you afraid to use it on your enterprise projects, you can make it like I think that once a day I will set up a short demo and will play with it like for my own, because it's interesting. Maybe like just to evaluate, maybe you know, I will allow it in next project or some. We have a bunch of projects inside company and we are free to choose tools. Like this will be in Rest Assured, this will be in some other stuff. So maybe we will try it, as I said, because I see that it's really a beautiful library or framework. I don't know how to call it correctly, but for people with not big experience in programming, let's say, yes, they don't have to bootstrap like to include all these libraries. They just create a project, include one dependency mentioned in documentation, and start writing tests. No all this reporting, annotations, all this complicated things in Java that you have to learn, and you can do mistakes, and like you are not, you know, it's one of the moments when test automation engineers, let's say, being punished that they are not actually writing tests, they are writing a framework that is like useless itself, because like we have a framework, but we have 3 automated tests. We spent half a year doing what? Writing a framework. But okay, we are here for what? Writing frameworks or writing tests? And that's I think that your tool is solving that you are writing tests starting point 0, let's say, yes, not writing.
It's a good point.
This
I wanted to just add on that is if you choose Groovy way, not saying you should, but if you do for your first try out, then you don't even need any installs. You don't even need any Mavens. You can say SDK man install WebTau or brew install testing is documenting WebTau, and then say WebTau -- example. And you're going to get two examples. I think two examples. One is for REST API and one is for browser. I can run them right away. All right. So you get from 0 to a running test, even if it's not against your system, is like under 2 minutes. No ID required, no editor required.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting. And yeah, I think do you have anything like additional, maybe, like, or it's like mostly?
No, I think we covered a lot, and yeah, thanks for giving me so much time and opportunity to talk about it. Usually it's 20-30 minutes here and there with no proper questions, no proper discussion. So I appreciate
And the last,
time and effort.
question I want to ask, it's usually, when like people evaluate some tools to use on their projects or something like that. Because once it's like a last funny story from me today. Last I quit a company, not fired, but I quit my decision, because people said we don't want to use selenite. No, so I used a selenite to write UI tests, and it was not approved. No, kind of, you are working in big enterprises. It sometimes needs some dump
100%.
approvals for some libraries. No, it's like corporate rules. Because it's open source, it's written by someone. Tomorrow he will throw away project, and we will live without like we will be in trouble. And let's write our own. Let's write a wrapper around Selenide. I said that it's a stupid idea. Write wrapper around. Like,
sounds like something weird.
They were not okay, and I said okay. Then I go. I will go to the company or the project that like where in these big enterprises, it's positions like QA architect, QA manager, some big boss, VP of
abstractions.
I will go the project where we don't have such how to say, old-fashioned people that are like writing things their own way, not spending time efficiently. And that's a question like, do you support it actively, or it's like do you bring new features, so it's like more stable project and you just maintain it, fix bugs?
A lot of new features recently, like WebSockets and better outputs with highlights, that they were become even better in the last quarter and a half. And there are not many people on Discord. Mostly half of them are my friends. Half of the people had never say anything, and they probably came there randomly. But whoever asks a question on Discord that gets the fastest response, GitHub issues might get like a day or two. But to put numbers into perspective, is roughly 1.5 hours a day spent on the project. And that's because my commute is 45 minutes on average in one way in the bus. And due to corporate networks and office politics, it's hard to work during the bus commute on complete remote desktop because of the spikes of connectivity. And I choose to work on WebTau project. So, it's like roughly 10 hours a week, or not 10 hours, like 7-8 hours a week on the project. If things goes just smoothly and it's my backlog. If there are issues, obviously I jump on it, because that's what fuels me. Someone tried something and it didn't work, or they have a good idea, chances are in the next release they get the feature. Or even I'll push the release and just release a few features for them.
So, and you said Discord, so the main connection point, so it's better to join Discord and ask questions. Yes, if I, for example, if I am interested and want to,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, Discord
Have
is
some
easier
questions.
to communicate back and forth than GitHub issues, which, you know, something in 5 minutes on Discord, what's it called, in a thread could be solved, and otherwise it will be like a couple of hours back and forth asynchronous communication. Either works. I'm monitoring issues, pull request, and Discord, but Discord I get pop-up notification on my phone and can answer right away.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, Sergey,
Okay.
there's one thing I think it's, for some reason, I think it's important because that's the domain name, testing is documented. And I want to show you at least one quick, not slide, but screen inside the documentation. So people just aware, because we didn't do the other slides that were talking about it for a little bit more. Every module in WebTau, almost every module, like at least 3 modules in WebTau, HTTP, browser, and CLI, provides you a way not just test things, but also capture additional artifacts. And I want to highlight these 2 lines here. Is you can do, after any HTTP call, you can do HTTP doc capture, and it will capture the request, the response, the URLs, all of that in separate files. And the reason you need those files, or you might want to need those files, is and then you can later stick them into documentation. Whatever documentation system you have, as long as the system lets you to include something from the outside world, you, like, here's a typical scenario. You need to document your REST endpoint. You might have your OpenAPI Swagger definition, right? So you can stick into your, you can stick it in your documentation, say, here's how request looks, here's how response looks. But can you give me an example of actual request and response that is not outdated, right? And so WebTau, you can capture actual request and response. You also can capture the things that you asserted on. Probably they were important, that's why you asserted on them. And then you can all combine it together. Your Swagger definition and your captured request and response, and get the bigger, better picture, right? Because otherwise you'll copy paste something from the curl, stick it into your docs, and docs get outdated in the next moment. Same with browser, for example. With browser, you're not just capturing screenshots. With browser, you can capture screenshots and the positions of certain elements. Those positions of certain elements can be stored in a JSON file. And so later, when you document your UI system, you can do things like I did here, right? Like, hey, you click here, the screenshot, the buttons position, all of that gets maintained as you rerun your test. And what you look at right now is another system I have, it's documentation system, but you don't need to use it. As long as you have a means of taking a screenshot and applying annotations on it from a JSON file, you can leverage WebTau to capture that additional information. And so it's not just a screenshot for your reporting purposes. It's deliberate screenshot in a specific moment of time where you want to convey something to your user. And to give you an example, once in a project, in a company I'm not going to make, we had a documentation that had around 100 screenshots. And then the screenshots were taken manually initially. And then someone had to redo the documentation because the UI changed, the styles changed, the buttons placement changed. As you can guess, nobody redid the documentation, right? With this approach, next time I had to do it, all the screenshots were taken automatically. I also had around 100 screenshots of the entire documentation of the system. Anytime I rerun my test, they will rerun the screenshots, they will rerun everything. And so basically, you're going to get into this build, deploy, run your test, and build documentation. That's one of the reasons the main is called testing is documented. It's not figurative, it's quite literally. You run your test and they produce something extra that you can use in your documentation, not just you look at your test and you understand how your system works. That's the only point we didn't touch at all, and I figured it would be could be beneficial to quickly cover. All right, that's it from.
The question is like, you came to these ideas of these features by like real tasks. So on some projects you had to document, like, I don't know.
So this one, you see this create employee, post, get, all of that. We had like hundreds of endpoints like this with request payload and response payload examples that were initially handcrafted. But that project was almost like a startup within a startup. It was rapidly developed. whatever we will put on a wiki or whatever we put in any documentation manually would be outdated next release. A field will be renamed, a new field will be introduced. And you can imagine the hell you go through to maintain this. That's why a lot of companies I go to, they don't have documentation because nobody want to sign for, I'm going to be maintainer of this doc. Now, whenever I go, I say, I'll be maintainer of those docs because I know how. Most of my content is automatically generated. Like even if we take a look at at this guy, right, at the article we were reading, we were going through, right, with all these outputs, all of these things, I did not copy pasted those things, right? It's by me running my test, I was capturing something else. And if I go to that other presentation, we didn't go at all, but you saw it a couple of years ago, this whole, like 60% of the content of this was almost like auto-generated, right? Auto-generated by test. The screenshots, even these screenshots, the report screenshots, all of the things, I was not taking screenshot myself as part of writing this article.
Okay.
It was all, captured.
The last thing, do you have some example of HTML report? How is it look like, or it's hard to find?
No, it's easy. Let's should be relatively straightforward.
Just an example how it look.
How it behaves. Yeah. Let me quickly open. I have here. So as you can guess, WebTau tests WebTau itself. Right. So I have JUnit tests that run JUnit tests. I have JUnit tests that run Groovy tests. And so basically now I'm using JUnit to run WebTau Groovy using WebTau Groovy command line. So basically I'm end-to-end testing WebTau 2 using WebTau as it. Sometimes it gets complicated in my own head. It's like, oh, but I think it's important to have this dark-fooded experience. Ooh, why is rebuilding everything?
It's Java.
No, I think I had some issues with class
I can provide a joke while we are waiting. It was in one of our teams, it was an experience to describe the job of your colleagues. For example, backend should write their expectations, how frontend works,
right.
Frontend about backend, QA about BE, some shuffled positions. And the front-end team said, well, if how I see backend developers, they come to work, start Java machine, and go to kitchen boiling coffee. While Java machine is starting, they are drinking coffee, then come to the table and start working. It was very fun, because they thought that these things they saw that idea doing something, and people mostly waiting, sitting and I don't know how about modern idea, but previously idea just freezed, everything freezed, and you sit and you really don't do. And they thought that you are really starting everything, a magic happens, and it was very funny that JVM starting.
But it was even worse. One of my first projects in Ukraine was working for the C++ heavy company, and the compilation process for a single file was okay. You compile it to get an errors in under seconds. But the linking process of all the hundreds of thousands of C++ files could take up to 30 minutes. So you can code, but in order to see something, you have to link. Well, long story short, we ended up buying a ping pong table, 4 of us working on the project, and we were trying to synchronize our linking process. So when we link, we can actually stand up and play 2v2 on a ping pong. That was one of the brightest memories. Sometimes I miss project like this. So I ran a test, and you can see in my output, it does all of this stuff. And at the end, it says report is generated and the link. And now you look like you're frozen. Can you move? 1, 2, 3. Hello?
Yes.
you were looking like you're frozen. So I ran the test. There's a link at the report. There's a report here. It has only one test, but you can see there is some metrics on the very first summary, like test success ratio, HTTP operation coverage, which is quite also interesting. Is if you have Swagger enabled, Open API enabled, then it knows how many operations you have defined, and it knows how many operations did you actually run. That's different from data coverage. Data coverage is per operation. It might take this specific operation has these fields that nobody looked at. And when I click on a specific test, we're going to get HTTP calls, all the steps. There's only one step and one call. And if we unpack it, we'll see the validations performed here. But I wanted to show you, and unfortunately, it only works for Groovy specifically, but it's pretty cool. I hope you will appreciate it. So I say, by the way, you see here temperature 88, and it's like curly symbols here. It means it doesn't matter much, but it just means it wasn't a strict assertion. It was like greater, less, contain, regex. It wasn't an exact equality. So that's why it displays like this. So I'm going to make this test fail now. We're going to get this stuff saying it's a problem, blah, 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 all of that. Summary at the end, in case if you had like 100 tests ran, at the end, it will print the first 3 fail. And if I go to report now, and I click on the fail test, only for Groovy, unfortunately. Maybe you know how to do this for Java. When I click on this, I'm going to get the lights highlighted in the script, the test script, and the lights that are culprit. So like at the call and then the nested call, those are the problems. And if there is more stack trace calls, like if you have page object, something, it will put all those files next to each other and highlights the jump lines. And this is so useful when you have Groovy scripts and you run it on Jenkins and you're like, oh, that I see this, I see HTTP calls, I see error here, I have stack trace, full stack trace step. I wish to add this to Java as well, but I need to learn more about how to actually get access to source code. There is all these protection domains and they differ from one Java to another. And maybe if you have experience, we can talk offline and how to add something like this for Java test as well, because I think this is pretty powerful.
Yeah, that's one of the, I think, selling points, let's say. It's really interesting, but like this highlighting stuff, and it gets easier to understand where is it failing. It's like, you know, I like Groovy in some period of time before because of these assertions, like it's called power assert, when it says this is 2, this is 3, and equality not like that's and this is like kind of a bit different, but this highlighting is really really cool.
So this, just to be clear, this portion you're gonna get for both Java, Groovy, Kotlin anyway. So like this failed step, you know, the biggest culprit, it's this portion that in Groovy it's easier for me to extract it because I already know the Groovy source files because the one that's been run. That's the one I compile internally. But in case of Java, if I were to know the way to get access to source code without all the bytecode manipulation, then it would be awesome. Then I could just stick here as well with all the highlights. And remember when we texted, you told me, oh, it might be like up to 1 hour and a half. It's like, oh, there is no way I can sit through this 1 hour and a half. And you've been you pointed me to this way or that way, and I'm being excited about this whole topic. And now I look at the clock. I think it's more than 2 hours now.
Oh yeah, it's our 2 hours. When I asked you to book 2 hours, you said, why so long? Because I know our timing. We usually spend some less. We sometimes agree like, let's make in 40 minutes. Okay, everybody says, okay, 40 minutes, time management, everybody looking to watches. But when we start and write, it comes like late night. You see my background, we started, it was sunny, and now it's a bit different. So that's the usual situation. But I am really interested in this tool because, as I said, I do such streams to learn myself, like to know, because for me it will, I don't know when I find a time to see it and read documentation, but now I have first class explanation about tool features, and I understand main points. And on my level, it's enough to understand where it's useful, when I can use it on next project or not. And like the more one of the important things is that this tool is created by like Ukrainian guy. Like I don't know, how do you feel? You are still Ukrainian or US? Do you have a US passport? Yes or no?
I still know it's green card, and my both parents and brother in Ukraine.
Okay. But I just how to say, promoting everything Ukrainian, because we are sometimes suffering because of this Allure report. It's quite popular and there is no alternatives, and people like we can behave differently, saying that okay, it's open source, nothing like there is nothing special, we don't pay money, don't support it in any case. But still, I believe that when we have something that created by our how to say, people
Countrymen.
countrymen, we have to support and promote. And the second motivation is that I really didn't heard a lot. So I saw these presentations on some conference, YouTube, you can Google and see, they are on Russian. If you are okay, you can watch it. But I mean that it's maybe it will give you promotion. I mean, this tool people will use and give you some ideas, bugs, I don't know, popularity.
Yeah, that would be.
You
So
will be hired,
initially
by Google and
no, I'm good for it. Yeah, but initially I was chasing stars because that was only metric. But now, I really, what I would like is to have a communication, to have a chat with anyone who's actually doing end-to-end testing, because people in their majority, they don't consider testing as a discipline. They don't have the muscles developed in this discipline. It's mostly afterthought. And if there is someone who's genuinely interested in something, that would what gives me inspiration. It is actually helping. It was helping me. It's helping my friends. But it's hard to get attention of anyone else. And yes, if your stream, if your recording helps to get even one person who's genuinely like, oh, I want to test and I have this use case and I have that use case and I have that issue. It's like, oh my God, that issue is so cool. Let me think about it. That's what I'm looking for. Not initially it was GitHub stars, but now the project has 300 stars. It's going very slowly, but I don't see issues created every day. Right? I don't want issues created every day, but I would like at least one conversation be a week. And I'm not.
Oh yeah, I understand. Yet. You want to see feedback, but there is no feedback, engagement. And you don't understand. Is it because of no issues, or is it like it's like a teacher in the school or university? Do you have questions? No, it means everything is clear or nothing is clear.
Something like
that's
that.
Like I because I understand. I have this open sourced browser management. Selenium requires this web driver, and I created driver manager for Python. It's like port of Java, so it was written in Java. I learned Python. It's my way of learning. I'm learning by doing. So maybe I take some popular project and try implement maybe the same or completely the same, but using technologies that I learn, like Python, Node.js, doesn't matter. And I understand like this maintainer pain when you do something and you don't understand. You see that it's popular. People, I have also 1,000 or something like.
Oh no, yours is popular. Mine is accident.
And it's like, it's even mentioned in official Selenium documentation, blah blah blah. But I did nothing to do. I just promote. I put zero efforts to promote it. It was promoted by one Indian guy. Actually, he recorded video, and it was blown. It's people send me video and said that look, this guy created a video with 7,100 views, and maybe you have to take this project, like put more attention, because for me it was like some GitHub repo,
Right.
like, you know, okay, let it be. But then it start racing, and I mean that it's really hard. You don't understand, like you do something and you don't understand issues, no issues, maybe
Yeah.
redo something, maybe, and that's really
So hook me up with that guy. How do you get into his video?
With Indian, I don't know. It was
No,
several
just
years
kidding.
ago.
I'm just kidding.
I think if I Google, then I will find this video because it's recorded. It is like, you know, these Indian guys, they like to record such tutorials and all this stuff.
Right,
We
right.
are usually lazy a bit because you
Yeah.
think, okay, I have to spend an hour to record. I
Yeah,
have
yeah.
to write the script to make
Oh,
it
you
like
do have to write scripts? Okay, now I know something. No, just yeah.
no,
Writing
like
a script is tough.
to be more concise, like to make it
Right.
short. And you think, I don't want. I just want to lay on the bed, and that's why these guys making big success on YouTube. But again, thanks for your time and efforts. You created a
Okay.
really cool instrument, and I think it will help a lot for maybe generations of QA engineers, and not only QA. You are targeting all like developers, QA, all people who are interested in web testing. Like, and I believe even if you have CLI, not only web testing. And thanks for your time.
Thanks for the invite.
I
and
think
thanks for
that
curating it.
if I will leave links for this tool and maybe contacts like Twitter handle on description to this video. And
Yeah,
anybody
that'd be nice.
who still here with us with this long stream or video, if you're watching on YouTube, press some buttons, links, share, support our Ukrainian like army, because it's our today it's only one of our supporters, or how to say, advertisers. Yeah, so we, but not they give our money for us, but we are doing everything to help to collect money. Also, if you okay, you can donate to any of the companies, people. I don't know. We several weeks ago we bought a bus, like this minivan, and sent to
Nice.
Donbass, and that's the main goal of the streams, also to remind you that we are still fighting against powerful enemy. So
Thanks
for your time and efforts. See you next time.
Слава Україні.
Yes. Так. Ну що, значить, вийшло, все гарно. Зробимо, значить, стоп. Не забудь. Так. Are you sure you want to stop recording?